Oh,
Good evening, Janelle. How are you?
I'm exhausted if I'm being honest.
Long day?
Yeah, long day. I taught an 8-hour workshop here. I'm at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. And so we did an offsite at the local Rose State College and did, yeah, 8 hours of high performance mindset training. It was a long day, but a really rewarding day in the end. But, I'm not going to lie, like the travel and then on your feet and heels all day, like, I'm looking forward to crawling into bed tonight.
Bet you are. Well, hopefully this will give you a little bit of energy, a little bit of zip as we go through this topic, because I know one that this is my favorite topic of everything we talk about. This is my favorite one to talk about tonight. And so hopefully that'll give you a little bit of zhuzh as you are coming off of that big, long day. So tonight we're going to talk about confidence. And I love talking about this topic because of all the keys to, for me, performance or sort of making sure that I brought what I had, brought my best self and best capabilities to work, home, whatever. A lot of it was an issue of confidence and just showing up and believing that I could do it, or knowing that somebody believed in me enough and that gave me enough sort of to want to have confidence in that. So anyway, do you want to start off by talking about your sort of experience with confidence, or where that, because I know you feel equally passionate about this topic.
I do. Out of the 16 principles of mindset that I teach in the Warrior's Edge course, confidence is actually one of the key components. In fact, we devote like a significant portion of the training to it. So before I get into because I know you could talk about our experiences, we can start there. And then also, some of the things we've used to help us. And so I'll kind of get into the training piece. But for me, I think that I actually never really struggled with confidence in a way where I was never necessarily afraid to try things or do things. And I think part of that was just in the way I grew up. I tell a story about how my dad, even I can remember distinctly being 7 years old, and we'd be standing in the grocery store and strangers would come up to us and just strike up a conversation. And my dad would all of a sudden say, "Oh, this is my daughter, Janelle, and she's going to grow up to be a submarine warfare commander or a combat pilot." And I would just kind of stand there looking at him and see these strangers, and their eyes would light up and kind of be like, "Oh, you little girl." Of course I was most likely in ballerina slippers and a tutu or gymnastics outfit. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I'm going to grow up and be. And this was the 80s when, women couldn't even do those things. But
Right.
my parents really instilled in me this idea that I could kind of grow up and do or be anything. So I kind of had a lot of drive and confidence from being raised in that way. It showed up a lot different for me, in different aspects and different parts of my life, for sure. And then now that I train it and teach it, I definitely have a different perspective, and I really study and hone in on where does confidence come from when you're in an intense moment, right? How do you navigate that pressure and build the confidence to perform at your best? But overall, I would say I never really struggled with taking risks or trying things or putting myself out there. I always kind of felt why not me? Right? That's kind of, I think, where my confidence came from most of the time. Well, if somebody else can do it, why not me? And then plus that upbringing with my dad, I think really helped.
Yeah, I think that's true. We were both so lucky because we grew up in households where no one told us that wouldn't be possible for you to do, right? I have that same thing, and that sort of instilled self-assurance that we kind of grew up or were kind of told growing up. I think that's really important. Where I saw it the most was actually after, we graduated, and I remember being in pilot training, and what showed up the most for me in pilot training was when I would fly and I would really internalize any critique that I was given. Hey, you didn't do this well, you didn't do this, and I took a lot of hits. And I took those internally. And then I would watch the guy next to me, and he would get a similar debrief, and he would just whatever, I was fine. And I remember thinking to myself, wait, how are you just rolling that off? Like that person just told you how terrible you are, right? Not how you did, but how you are. You are horrible. And they would be like, no, it wasn't me. It was the wind. It was the weather. You know what I mean? Like that guy bumped the stick. And I just remember being like, wow. But as those two paths kind of diverged, I watched those people that sort of brushed it off or just were like, no, I'm really good. There's an outside factor. I remember they actually continued to perform better while I continued to sort of cycle or like fall into a vortex. And I realized that confidence, it wasn't just about them, like that was reinforcing behaviors for them, whereas I was ruminating and sort of being pulled down by it. And so, excuse me, that was my first sort of hint, like there's something to this idea of, you faking it till you make it, or acting confident, or not letting yourself get caught up in moments that kind of chip away at your confidence. And I think that for me, that was a really defining moment where I just kept seeing these people that were achieving and they were no more or less talented. They just kind of had a mentality, a mindset that allowed them, I think, to do it. And that's why I really think that, your conversation about how do you get into the right mindset, that's actually really, really important in confidence, because I think there's two sides. I think you can have internal natural confidence, right? Like some of the research will say that some people are just born genetically to be predisposed to being confident, but most people are not. And you can learn ways in which you can still, gain confidence in different areas. So that's one. And then the other one, I think, is there's this aspect of outside. When people believe in you and they have expectations of you, I think then you tend to go, oh, well, if that person really does think I'm capable, then I must be. So I think there's two sort of like an internal and an external aspect to it.
Did you also find with the confidence that you developed, because and you brought up a poignant point about like the male versus female perspective. I was the only female in my pilot training class, and so there was that dynamic of kind of like trying to prove yourself and when you're the only one. And I think most of both of our careers, I was an only one many times. I had that, I think I grew up with that instilled confidence, but I had to work on it because I struggled with this idea of cockiness, right? Like an overconfidence that I would see in a lot of the guys. I'm like, you're just overconfident and you have nothing to like, put your head on to really like prove that you could do this. But yet you still are like overflowing with this confident, aura about you. And like that borderline to cockiness with it. And then this idea that we teach now, which is that there's a positive thinking skill set of swagger, right? Like swagger is different than cockiness and overconfidence. Like swagger is just like, you feel good to be you and you understand what your capabilities are and that you're comfortable like owning the confidence in that space. And so I think I always kind of struggled with that, especially in like a male dominated career field, of like where I could go with it, where were the limits, what was the right thing, like where was my right place in that space. I don't know. Did you ever struggle with that?
I don't have that one as much because I always felt a little bit less confident and less comfortable maybe. But I would say, again, from your perspective, the mindset perspective of how to best perform, I can see where that'd be a struggle. I would say from an outsider, if I was to mentor somebody that's struggling, I would say, I'd much rather see you go towards the edge of cockiness. I'd much rather you default to a cocky, overly confident, even if it's just mannerisms, than I would underconfident, because that impacts the way people are seeing you. Right. So like the reason I think it's so important to even fake confidence, and I think there's some good research out there, and I love the book. I even have it here with me, the Presence, Amy Cuddy's book, and talking about like posing like Superman and how that impacts you. I always tell my daughters, anyone that works for me, like just stand up tall, walk with swag, whatever you need that helps you feel confident. That's way more important than even being worried about somebody thinking you're too cocky, right? Because I think that most of the time we have the skills, or at least we have most of the skills. And so it's better for you. And I know there's business study after business study that shows what matters more is confidence over competence. you will get promoted higher. You will get paid more. You will get recognized more frequently. You will get rewards and awards because of overconfidence, not underconfidence. And so I think that's a fair point to say, like, hey, if you really want to be good at performance, you better be careful. But if I was going to default one way, I'd say I'd rather be cocky than I would be like, small and meek and I don't know, I'm so scared.
That's so interesting that we both, because I would say the dialogue in my head and the negative thought patterns would go more for me toward like, don't be overconfident, like don't like come across like in a conceited way. So like that's something that even today, like that's where my mind will go. Like when, oh, don't tell that story. And we've gotten critiqued, by people who listen to our show that we need to tell more stories and we need to like, I really get uncomfortable sometimes because like to me in my head, I go to this like, don't be overconfident and like think you know everything because I know I don't and I know everything's learning. But like it's interesting because I don't think I as so often went the other way. So we each kind of had our own experiences kind of building and creating these careers in these male dominated industries. But I like love Amy Cuddy's stuff as well. I got to meet her. She actually helped mentor me on my TED Talk. Maybe we should invite her on a show in the future to kind of talk about it because the whole idea of creating and, her research definitely leads us to believe standing in certain ways, right, with those postures increases your level of testosterone, and those levels of testosterone do correlate to feeling more confident in certain moments. And I have not, or I've been known to maybe possibly go into the bathroom before a speech, take a mindful minute, do my breathing techniques and stand there like Wonder Woman to kind of just like prepare myself to have the swagger when I walk out on a stage.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm the same way. And I always have that pose if I'm presenting, stand tall. We're both shorter in stature, so that's a challenge for us. But, I also think it matters how people see you. Like as equally as important as my audience is, like myself, my individual audience, the audience that I'm addressing or the people that are around me, that's actually in my mind, the audience I'm trying to convince that I'm confident, that I know what I'm talking about, whatever. Because I think internally I'm like, I know a thing or two, but I'm actually trying to let them know, yeah, I'm here, I'm taking up my space, all that. So I think there's this internal, external that I'm always struggling with. And if I'm going to be one way, I'm going to try and be overconfident or over, expressive, overly large in my space. Because so as a, instructor here at the Air Force Academy, I watch female cadets. So we're about 30% women. So, just under a third. And inevitably, I can't even say year groups, but throughout the whole time I see them, there is a large portion, not all, but a large portion of our female cadets that sit in the back, that sit along the side and don't participate, make themselves small. They're kind of quiet and meek. They're always scared to assert anything. And that breaks my heart because I'm sure they have just as good of answers as anyone else in the class. And so that one for me is like, no, just say it. Just throw it out. You know what I mean? Say what you got to say. Practice expressing yourself. That's really hard, I think, for women. I don't know, like you and I necessarily struggle with that, but I'm sure there's times where we did.
Oh, for sure. And I think the key to that, what you were just discussing, is that those women aren't getting the opportunity to get the reps in either of like being in situations where you have to step forward or take those risks, because we do know by the research as well that you have to have some repetitive practice. You have to take many risks to build the self-trust in your ability to be confident. And so like with what we talk about and when I talk about confidence, I'm talking about specifically like you are in a high performing moment, you're flying your airplane in an intense situation. How do you get confidence, right? When your flares go out and you're in the middle of a thunderstorm, like flying a C-130 on night vision goggles in the middle of Iraq, right? Like where does confidence come from in that moment? Where does confidence come from when you're at the free throw line with like the game-winning shot, right? And we know from that evidence-based research as well as the science to back it up is that confidence in those moments comes from really one place only, and it's credible self-talk, right? Like what you say to yourself. So going back to like both of us having these narratives on either side of the confidence spectrum, right? What you say to yourself in intense moments will either, bring you confidence to perform in those moments, or it's going to be detrimental to your ability to perform at your best. And we say credible self-talk because you can't just tell yourself in that moment, like, I'm amazing, I'm the best, without anything to back it up, right? We would always say, like, you have to kind of, right, like back it up. But the only way you back it up is by gaining the experience, gaining those reps, like putting yourself out there. And so, like, if, it does break my heart to hear that too, that there are women that are choosing, right, to sit there in the corner or in the back and not getting those reps, especially at a space like at the Air Force Academy, where the whole purpose is for you to practice and throw yourself out there and make mistakes and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I know we'll talk about mantras here in a second, but I think, that you bring up a really good point, which is this is a practice. And so when I used to do like little courses, particularly on bases, flight commanders courses or whatever, and I always pick the topic of confidence. And we always say, hey, think about the most confident person you know, right? Famous person, whoever, just a person that in your mind exudes confidence. And again, what we mean is like self-assurance. Exude that they trust themselves under any circumstances. That's what I mean. And so they, pick a person. And it usually was a famous person, right? A famous athlete, a politician is often picked. Sometimes somebody in like senior leadership at that base, whatever. And I'd say, do you think that they are confident in one thing, two things, all the things? What are they confident in? Well, they seem to be confident in all the things. Okay, well, do you think that they were always confident? Well, maybe, maybe not. How many things do you think they had to do to get confident? And I think the answer is millions. You have to do millions of things so that you can gain confidence, because you don't just know you can do something. You have to learn to trust yourself in some ways. You have to learn to know that you'll be able to figure it out, right? And so I know you teach a lot about mantras, and I have one that I always say to myself, which is, I will figure this out. Like, I don't know the answer yet, but I can figure it out. I will figure it out. And I think that that's helpful for me to go, that's a credible thing, because I have always been able to figure something out, right? My mom used to always say, there's always a solution. You don't know it, but there always is a solution. And I think that's the same idea. Like, we can figure this out. We just got to work it out. So what do you kind of say? What's your thoughts for mantras?
So real quick before that, I want to say, I totally see that as your mantra, right? Like, you are a problem solver, like, ever since I've known you, that is where I think your thriving space is. So I'm just going to say, like, as someone who coaches and teaches on that, like, you got a good one, right? Because it has to be meaningful and fit the person. And so, like, I'm like, nailed it. For me, what I've kind of come up with, and this is something that I share with my kids right now as they're kind of like figuring out and crafting their own, but we use the phrase, I can do difficult things. So to me, what that represents is that whatever it is I'm about to do that I'm maybe nervous about, or it's just a new thing, so I'm taking a risk, there's most likely something in my past that is similar in some way that has been a hard thing that I was unsure of before. And I made it through that event or that project or that moment of my life. So therefore, it gives me like the credibility to say to myself, like, I can do difficult things, right? Which is kind of another way of saying I can find a way to figure it out, right?
I'll get this done.
Yeah, I'll get this done. And in fact, so you remember the Brim Trail that we biked when you guys came to visit last summer. So it's one of our favorite bike rides. It's at the top of Powder Mountain. It's like a 6.5 mile loop. And we do it a lot. It's our favorite one in the area. And Andrew, the first couple years that we would take him up there, the last mile is like 1 mile straight, steep and uphill. And every time he makes it up the hill, but he stops, right, a couple times along the way. And this one time we were standing at the bottom of this like final mile, and I turned to him and I said, Andrew, let's try to make it up without stopping this time. And he was like, Mom, I can't do that. There's no way I can make it up there. And I'm like, but you always make it up. You know you can make this climb. Let's just try this time to not stop as we do it. And he kind of like, huffed and puffed about it. And I said, Andrew, remember, we can do difficult things. So he gets on his bike and he just starts pedaling and he starts chanting like, I can do this because I can do difficult things. I can do this. And I started chanting with him and we're like chanting together. Before we knew it, we were at the top. Right? Like your mind will quit well before your body will, right? Like you'll just tell yourself, I can't do this. And those types of thoughts, right? If you don't have a confidence mantra to anchor on, your mind will go to the negative thought patterns that I can't, this moment's too big for me. I'm too nervous. And so that's why we teach people to train and build these mantras that are meaningful to them and that work so that they can reframe the situation and rewire their brains toward confident thinking in those moments.
Is it also help to like quiet all those other things? Like if you're saying one thing and focus on that one thing, then you're able to sort of push out some of those other, you know what I mean? Those other negative thoughts. Like you can't say two things at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And part of it too, this is something, I can't remember if we've talked about this yet, but just this idea that, so say you're going to take a test and your body activates, right? You get butterflies in your stomach, your heart starts racing, right? Very common thing. Almost immediately, most of us in our culture today will interpret those sensations as nerves, right? We've been told butterflies in the stomach, heart racing means nerves. Well, actually, the initial sensations of heart racing and butterflies in your stomach are actually your activation because you're doing something that's meaningful to you, right? Like you care about the outcome, so your body's going to activate because you need a little bit of like eustress, like the good kind of stress to be a high performer. But what happens almost immediately when we interpret those sensations as nerves or I can't do this or my body's telling me like, you know, this moment's too big, that language in and of itself pushes us out of that eustress, the good kind of stress, and into distress where we actually degrade our performance. We're not at our best. That's where we're making like emotional decisions to things. So like you could see yourself at the test and you're starting to like erase heavily and you're getting all stressed out and you're anxious about the, you know, answers you're putting down. It completely changes the experience just by the thought patterns that you allow to have in your mind. So that's why you have to pre-load, right? Front load this work by figuring out a mantra to go to when you feel those sensations so you don't automatically go toward those negative thoughts. You rewire them toward more positive, confident thoughts that then keep you in eustress so you can be your best.
And sort of focusing on the positive side of things, like I will get through this, I can achieve this, I can figure it out, I can do difficult things. And that basically, by recognizing the feelings, say, yeah, because I'm feeling this, I obviously care and I obviously want to do better. This is a good thing. These are all good things. I'm not about to freak out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it fits with, I know we've talked about mindfulness, but the idea of mindfulness also is to kind of clear out and quiet our minds from having so many overwhelming thoughts. So then we can actually consciously choose the right thoughts in those moments.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we have a couple questions. We have some email questions that were sent to us on our email, creatinglift98@gmail. One says, this is from Sarah. She says, some days I feel confident and other days I feel like a mess. What do you recommend on those days where I feel confident to continue and those days that I feel like a mess to turn it around? What would you say?
So I would say on the days you feel confident, you need to create data points around that, right? Like they add to the credibility, right? It's almost like this vault of memories around things that I've done and I've successfully achieved that allow me the credibility to gain confidence. So when you're feeling really good, like it feels good to be you and you're like on fire and you're knocking things out and you're like, I am super confident, you need to store that, right? Like as a data point. First of all, having a lack of confidence is totally normal, right? Like don't think that, well, how can I be confident one day and not confident the other day? That's a completely human part of our experience, right? For us to kind of like adjust to different circumstances in different ways. I would say in those moments, one of the training tools that we use is when you have a lack of confidence and the thought patterns are something like, you know, I can't do this or I'm an imposter. What we would say is the first thing you should ask yourself when you have a destructive thought like that is it a fact? Right? And I'm not talking about like made up things. I'm like a legit fact. And most of the time when we have a destructive thought, we cannot back it up as a fact, right? So you start there and say, well, am I really an imposter? Like, no. Can I really say I can't do this? Like, that's not a fact, right? So then when you go from that first question, like, is this a fact? Then you have to flip it into a productive statement. That would be the second step that we would ask our, like the skill sets development. So is it a fact? And then secondly, how do I reframe it as a productive statement? So instead of saying, I can't do this, then you can say, is that a fact? Well, no, that's not a fact. And then how I would change it to a productive thought would be, I can adjust, or I can, like, I'm good at trying, right? Like something like, I will give it a try. I will go for it, right? Like, why not me?
At least I'm
right?
putting myself out there. At least I'm whatever.
Yes. And then the final step of this whole, like, flipping the conversation is then backing up that new productive thought, right? Like, so if you say, at least I'm giving it a try, like, think about like 2 other times that you lacked some confidence, but you still gave it a try, right? And most of us can think back and say, hey, here's some more data points from that memory of those times I was confident. Therefore, right, I can rewire and rework the moment I'm in.
Yeah, I like that, because you're trying to build little pebble stones, whatever you want to call it, that build you towards a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit bigger, a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging, whatever, so that you see, I'm not going to jump from A to Z. I'm actually going to take 15 steps in order to get there. And again, as we know from social psychology, it's easier to say, how far have I already come on the initial part of the journey, and then in the last part of the journey, it's better to say, how much farther do I have? So I can see that you're going to use the steps before you to kind of get you to the last one. Okay, here's our last question, and then we'll have to turn it off for tonight. But Leo sent this text or this email into the email, and he said, I feel confident, but I work with several people, male and female, that do not exude confidence. What ways can I encourage confidence as a supervisor for them? And so I'll take one hack at that, and then I'll turn it over to you. And one thing I would say is, it's just like as a parent, you can sometimes set up opportunities for people to succeed, right? You can, I think there's 2 things here. One is give them challenges and show them that you believe in them enough to give them that challenge. I think that's an easy one. Again, just like you were mentioning, building little steps so that library gets fuller and fuller. The second one is to make sure that they know that they are heard, that they're valued in the creation of whatever. And so I'm thinking back to this really interesting study I read long time ago. It's called The Silent Sex. And in it, they talk about getting people to participate in dialogues, PTA meetings, board meetings, whatever. And it talked about, if you are inclusive with the group, as the leader of the group, right? The president of the PTA, et cetera, you will actually encourage people to be open and honest. But if you just allow the certain people to talk that always talk, then you will actually shut it down so much faster. And so I'd say 2 things. 1, set up opportunities and remind them that you believe in them. And then 2, I'd say definitely make sure to include as many people as you can in the conversation. Again, that's even smaller steps, but I think it contributes.
No, I think that's great. That's great. Both of those are great tips. The only other thing I would add is those confidence mantras can also be used for teams. Misery loves company, right? Like, especially if you're in a military circle. And so it's really easy to like sit at a table, like present something, and then have someone say, nope, we can't do that. And then everybody, oh yeah, no, we can't do that. Right. And so like the whole, right, especially if you have like a negative Nancy that drives a lot of that like dialogue. So instead, like, do you have a mantra for your team to go to? Right? Like, and how are you building up the credibility and past experiences of what your team has accomplished? You can do things like shout out boards in your unit where like you shout out all the good things that people are doing, all of the, things that like they put themselves out there and look at what they accomplished. Or like I've had teams do it like in a Friday all call kind of thing, like those kinds of shout outs or just that shout out board. But notifying it or having everybody aware of where those confidence building examples are coming from is important. And then secondly, I would say, if somebody, my kids do this all the time, like my daughter, especially, as I'm sure you'll relate to, she would say things like, I suck at math. And almost immediately out of my mouth is always, back it up. Like, I want to hear her back it up. Tell me all the reasons why you're bad at math. Because as soon as she starts saying, well, like, what's your grade? Well, I have like a B+ in math. Okay, a B+ does not equate to I suck at math, right? Like, what did you get on your last test, right? Like, is it just that you're not working hard enough to get to where you want to go? But you can't say that you just suck at math, right? Like, but we make those blanket statements all the time that just continue to degrade our confidence, and no one ever calls us out on it. And so as a leader, like, I would say that's also part of our job to be like, okay, like, back it up. Right? Just like we would back up our productive statements, can you back up those negative thought patterns? And most of the time, really, when people have to search through, like, is this a fact and can I back it up? Like, I can't. And so then that forces them to shift the thought patterns to the positive.
I love it. I think one of the things that's kind of come out this whole time is you really have to push positive reinforcement, whether it's internally to yourself, to your team, to whomever, but just continue to catch those negative thoughts, transition to the positive side of it, and then reinforce that behavior over and over again.
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, thanks, Janelle. That was fun chatting about confidence and trying to help us think through better ways in which we can become confident in all the aspects of our lives. If you guys, we will be back next week. Here, real quick, if you don't mind, I'm going to let Brian pop up, and I think he asked a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just coming to say hello before you guys leave. I didn't really get to catch too much of the talk tonight, so my apologies.
Don't worry about it, Brian. We appreciate that so much. We always love having you.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Awesome.
So we have, again, any more emails? Thank you for all the emails we get. That helps us think about what people want to hear about and gives us great kind of thoughts for questions that we might have, even for ourselves. So creatinglift98@gmail. You can always reach us there. Otherwise, we will be back. We have Creating Lift on YouTube, so we'll post the shows there. And we will be back next Thursday at 7 p.m.